Hi, everybody. JSWORLD Conference USA presents the future of Vue and Vite with Evan Yo, the creator of Vue. Vue is one of the most popular JavaScript development frameworks on the scene today, and we really can't wait to hear his vision of what's up next for these new technologies that are being built by Evan and the Vue and Vite core maintainer teams. Also, I'd like to give a special thank you to our host, Israel Rodan from Passionate People, who's quickly become a familiar face with the JSWorld and JavaScript conference community. He's been helping us organize the conference, taking care of the website, and guiding some truly fascinating conversations in our panels and interviews. My name is Amanda McDermott. I'm a front-end developer at Coinbase, and more importantly, I'm your host for today. But I'll hand it over to Israel, and I hope you enjoy this discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda. Hi, Evan. Great to see you today.
Hi.
Having the chance to now, I think this is like the third or fourth time that I had an opportunity to ask you about the future of whatever exciting things you're working on. So thank you for giving us a chance to do another follow-up on that. I wanted to start with, a recent tweet that you put there about a React opportunity that you may be open for. Is there something, you received an SMS message for anybody that is not aware. You received recently an SMS message about a React opportunity out there, out of the blue. So is there some news you want to share with the community?
Not really. No. I didn't even respond to the message.
But I mean, this kind of also reflects a bit the situation of the market right now. Like the developer community is growing so fast. The jobs market for the developer community is also just exploding like crazy. And recruiters probably need to do a slightly better job at targeting Vue developers in your case. But I wanted to, as always, thank you for all the work that you have been putting to the projects that you created and maintain as well. We recently heard wonderful news from the Vue 3 side about IE 11 and finally dropping support for it. The RFC started, I think, with Vue 3 itself. If I remember, like the discussion about it, it has now reached a consensus where Vue 3 is not officially supporting IE 11 anymore. What's your mind there? Is this something that was really something you were looking forward to do?
Yeah, I guess the moment I started working on Vue 3, I kind of secretly hoped that would be the case. Being able to just use ES 2015 as the baseline, having access to these new features that are either not polyfillable or costly to polyfill, like weak map or stuff like that. It's just liberating, and also you have to think less about transpiling because ES 2015 as a baseline just in many cases also allows you to get rid of transpilation. So it just makes your whole build setup also a lot simpler. Makes your development and build run faster too. Overall, I just think being able to drop IE 11. Also, we're seeing, correspondence from the Angular team. Angular just finalized dropping IE 11 too. Preact is going to do that very soon. So I'm in general very happy to see this trend going, because I think this new baseline will just simplify a lot of practices that we just have been burdened with for so long. It's great to shed that weight in the whole ecosystem.
I can totally see, because being on the side of also having to deal with some of those workarounds, I can totally empathize with that. What is the next thing to, let's say, get rid of? I mean, I'm not necessarily looking for the next browser to kill, but more like, are there still any of these not specific to a browser, but maybe specific to how the language itself is dealing with some stuff? Is there something like that?
Honestly, nothing with the same level of impact like IE 11 that I have in mind for the moment. I think ES 2015, maybe an alternative baseline would be native ES module support in browsers. I think that would be pretty nice. So that also gets rid of another layer of complexity in terms of deployment. So yeah, that would be something to look forward to as well.
We'll see. We'll see, definitely. And I have a bunch of questions about one tool in the ecosystem that is leveraging ES modules heavily, Vite. I'm going to go into questions for that soon, but staying on the topic of Vue 3. So you announced Vue. We had the pleasure of hearing about Vue 3 in a past conference of JSWORLD Conference and Vue.js Global. It's been now 10 months since that release. Of course, before that, multiple months of beta and alpha testing and release candidates. So you had a decision tree back in the early days of Vue 3 that was a nice pseudocode, and I will make sure that we include a link to that in the comments. Is there a version of that, let's say, at least in your mind now, that could be said like, well, this is the rule of thumb, let's say now, if you want to. And I know we have asked you this question before, but especially after what we just discussed on I11, etc., like what would be the rule of thumb to go for Vue 3?
Yeah, we probably should update that decision tree. So in fact, I think so. So the important thing to notice, and also we realize over time, is that when we talk about Vue, people no longer think of it as just a core library. So even though Vue 3 Core 3.0 was released as stable, and it's already stable for quite a time, a lot of people are still thinking about the whole ecosystem. When they think about upgrading, they're still thinking about how can I reuse my existing Vue 2 code base? How can I leverage existing Vue 2 libraries? And how do I transition from existing tooling into Vue 3? So there are a lot of little things that could be these paper cuts in terms of the overall development experience, like how do you reduce the verbosity when working with composition API? How do you get better TypeScript? So Vue 3 has better types, but how do you get better IDE experience when using TypeScript with Vue? And how do you get a faster build, right? A lot of these little things play into how the framework is perceived as a whole. So we realize that even though after releasing the core library, there's still a lot of work to do to make sure the whole package is actually coherent, so that we can tell people, say, when you get into Vue 3, you'll actually get a fully complete experience on all of these aspects. And for Vue 2, we had to build that over years, right? Vue 2 has been around for like, 4 or 5 years, right? And when Vue first came out, there was nothing like these. It was just a core library. We built all these pieces over time. And now when we say we want to transition the whole ecosystem to Vue 3, we actually have to fill all these boxes for Vue 3 as well, so that we can say, okay, now is the perfect time to actually do it. And so after release, we've been actually working on a lot of these aspects, and I feel we finally ticked almost all the boxes. So the plan right now is we're probably going to restructure the docs a little bit as well, because our previous docs has been focusing a lot on complete beginners coming from just only basic knowledge of front-end development. Then just going into Vue, assuming that you know nothing else. But the landscape has changed. A lot of developers, they may be coming from other frameworks. They already know what NPM is. They already know a lot of these basic knowledge. So the learning paths may differ, and people's perception of what Vue is as a framework. There are a lot of information that isn't immediately obvious for someone to look at Vue 3 on first glance. So we kind of want to provide clearer paths. So when you look at Vue 3, okay, like here's the IDE support, here's TypeScript support, here's if you're migrating from Vue 2, here's, just be honest with yourselves. Okay, we're now a framework. We have to actually cover all of these up front, instead of saying, here's just the script tag. It still works, but it's no longer the primary way people use Vue nowadays. So there are a lot of things to think in this front. And I think once we have a better, I guess the docs give people better funnels, like from different background, like you kind of can get into Vue from different angles. I think that's the moment where we will say, okay, this is like Vue 3 has just, completely got revamped. Now it's time to actually look at it, regardless where you're coming from. If you're an existing Vue 2 user, here's how you can do it. If you're coming from another framework, here's how you can do it. If you're a complete beginner, here's also something for you.
And I think that the composition API and many of the improvements in developer experience will definitely make sense in that regard, because developers that come from other frameworks are now finding a very familiar flavor when they're working with Vue that previously felt a bit like magic, right? And now it's a bit more like common, let's say commonplace among frameworks that, but Vue is still injecting its own magic with the single file components, for example, and APIs like this. You mentioned making way for developers with different levels of understanding of how the web works and how even browsers sometimes work. And I would like to maybe switch a bit to Vite, because Vite presents itself as a very modern tool to start essentially a new project, a framework agnostic project as well. And from the comments that we see online every day, like, it is actually really friendly for complete beginners, because it is extremely easy, extremely standard, no configuration to be made. But in that simplicity, it's also very, very powerful. How do you think this could be communicated to users, in a sense that yes, Vite can be extremely powerful, but you need to understand maybe a bit of what you're also trying to achieve there, because it can be overwhelming for users that approach it because of that simplicity as a no config, as a pretty standard tool, and then want to let's say take it to the next level. Is that powerful set of options going against, let's say, that simplicity for new users?
I think it's an interesting balance, and I'm pretty happy that we found a pretty good balance in the spot. I think the reason that we can present it still as a really minimalistic tool with high flexibility is because we kind of learned along the way. It's kind of, Vite is based on all the lessons we've learned while working on Vue CLI, right? Vue CLI started as a wrapper on top of Webpack, where we are basically saying this is a long config that we use while we are working on a Webpack-based project. Now let's wrap it up and call it Vue CLI so that our users don't need to deal with it. And in that process, we kind of learned what the users want, learned what should be in or out of the defaults. And when working on Vite, we already have all these ideas of what the user typically would want, like what today's developers tend to assume this should just work like this by default, right? And we also have a pretty good sense of what developers could potentially want to configure. Obviously, the difficulty here is I've been trying to expose as little configuration options as possible, but in the end, people still come up with these very legit use cases that required you to expose a way for them to tweak it. So in some way, it's kind of inevitable. And I think eventually it boils down to this balance between how flexible do you want to be, or how useful do you want to be for the mainstream use cases, right? I actually left a comment a while ago on the Hacker News thread about Vite, where Vite's design goal is essentially to say, let's optimize it for the 90% of very common use cases out there. So these 90% developers are essentially automatically on a happy path when they're using Vite. And if you're in the other 5% where your use case can be covered with a little bit of configuration, Vite can still cover that, right? And there may be another 5% users who just want complete control over how their whole build pipeline works. They want module federation, complex optimizations. they want total control, then they can still go for Webpack, right? So essentially, Vite is saying it is not Vite's goal to say we can replace Webpack in every single case. That is not the goal, right? The goal is to say for 90% developers who just want to build a typical application and you use Vite, you should be on a happy path. You shouldn't have to you shouldn't have to think too much about configuring your build tool just so that you can get a common, a sensible default to build something on top of.
Do you think that this flexibility and maybe this happy path by default nature has also led to users experimenting a lot in Vite, maybe trying purposely to take it to let's say to beyond the boundaries a bit because of how flexible it is?
Yeah, sometimes I do worry about that. and in reality, you can't really stop people from doing it. Yeah. So it takes restraint from the developer to know what your design scope is. And sometimes it's just knowing when to say no to feature requests.
That's true.
Yeah.
So we are now in version 2.1, is that right?
It's already 2.3.
2.3. Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah,
look at that. It's not only super fast, but growing super fast itself.
Yeah, we try to. The team is actually doing a pretty good job. We're trying to just do these relatively regularly release. Just whenever we have a few features, we're gonna release it, so that we care less about the marketing factor behind saying, oh, we had a new minor, this is the big hitter features, right? We're just trying to say, we had a few new features, here's a new minor. You can upgrade if you want. If we have really important feature, we'll probably talk about it, but in most cases, we just want to get the features out there at a regular pace so people can get, use them as soon as they can.
Yeah, and I think that everybody appreciates how open it was that when going from 1 to 2, many people even were like, wait, was there a 1.0? But it was a conscious decision that if you were going to break something, it makes sense to use the versioning as intended, right? So what is coming in the roadmap for Vite now? Because it seems that indeed with your idea of 90 to 95% of use cases being in the happy path, is there still something in that percentage that you are working
on? So honestly, we tucked so many things into 2.0 because we just feel like, oh, like might as well include this, might as well include that. So 2.0 pretty covers what I wanted in a tool that I would use myself for the most common cases. There are maybe a few things like being able to swap things out to CDN links or npm auto install, but like really these things are more like incremental. They don't really define how the tool works. From the very start, Vite was, the goal of Vite was just to be pragmatic. We wanted to build as something you can use today. You can actually ship something with right now. So that is important. And in that sense, stability is also kind of important. So we are kind of, getting swamped with a lot of these small edge cases reports, which we need to fix, and that takes time. So I think it's for the time being, it's kind of like this stabilization period where we just want to focus on small incremental improvements, making sure things work, cover the edge cases. I mean, in the long term, one thing I really want to address is there are two things, right? Since Vite focuses on speed, one thing is if you have many source modules, it can still be relatively slow to open the initial page. It's still faster than actually building the bundle, but that's where the biggest bottleneck typically is when you're using Vite on a large project. There are some ideas we're bouncing around on how we can potentially make this maybe something like a persistent cache for these module transformations. So essentially, when you load the initial page, reduce the time for the initial compilation of that. And another aspect of it is build performance, right? We know that Vite uses rollup under the hood. So the build is typically much slower than dev. And we intentionally do that because rollup is still very mature. Rollup is very mature in terms of first the plugin ecosystem. Second is it gives you this very flexible chunk manipulation phase where you can do advanced optimizations in terms of the asset chunks that you generate during build. So some of these abilities are still lacking in tools, say ESBuild, right? ESBuild's chunking and hashing is for a very long time, it's not being a priority because it's very application oriented. Right? ESBuild is already doing a fantastic job if you're just bundling things into a single file as a library. But when you're talking about applications, right, the constraints is very different. So this is where we see it's still not very mature for ESBuild, right? So if you're trying to use ESBuild to bundle an application, you may just run into blocks, which is why we didn't use it as the default. I mean, you technically can use ESBuild if you want to, but right, you just essentially you're making a trade-off where you don't get to do as fine-grained manipulation of the chunks as you'd wish, as you could with rollup. And another aspect is because you don't run production build that often. Most of the time, you probably just push to CI and let it build on the server, right? So, so in that sense, a 5-second build versus a 1-minute build really doesn't make that significant difference. So essentially, that's also an intentional trade-off we're making. But we do hope one day, something, maybe a native written bundler with first-class application bundling concerns addressed, right? Ideally in ESBuild. If ESBuild one day becomes that, covers that part, then we could theoretically switch over to use ESBuild for the production build as well. So obviously, we all Vite owes a lot to its fastness owes a lot to ESBuild. So we hope we can leverage more of that in the future. And at the same time, overall, this is just a trend where extremely performance sensitive work in JavaScript tooling is being delegated to these compile to native languages like Go and Rust. So I think this is going to be a general trend. There are a lot of smart people playing around with ideas in this area, and we'll obviously always keep an eye on this and see what we can leverage to just in a sense, Vite, right? Vite is trying to leverage these new advancements in those fields and package it up as something more directly consumable for users who are just trying to build an application.
And when you created it, you set up to just do a little somewhat hacky, let's say, tool for yourself, right? And then it has evolved into this tool that is not only providing a good showcase, let's say, of what's possible now with the platform and with modern tooling, but it's also supporting React, Lit Element, Svelte, Preact. Is there any other, let's say, framework or tool that you would like to just support in the Vite ecosystem?
I mean, technically, we don't have to actually support them, since it is framework agnostic by design. So it's more like we make it easy for framework authors to make their stuff work on top of Vite, which is one of the reasons why Svelte team decided to use Vite as the foundation for SvelteKit. We're seeing some indie frameworks like Solid and Markle. They are pretty much basing all their new tooling on top of Vite as well. Again, I think this ties into Vite being this sort of very sensible default where it covers most of the stuff any build tool has to cover if you're building an application. At the same time, it's not overly opinionated on how a framework should integrate with it.
Well, really looking forward to seeing the evolution of that, and I'm pretty sure that the maintainers of these new emerging frameworks are taking a close look at what can be done with Vite and the heavy lifting Vite is helping them do. Evan, I would like to really thank you again for being here with us and sharing your overview on what's next to come for Vue and Vite. Where can we, I always ask you this, but where can we follow more in depth about what the core teams are working on and what you are up to?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is at Youyuxi, Youuxi. That's the spelling of my Chinese name. You can also just follow the at vue.js official Twitter account. That's where we'll be making big announcements. And also, if you're interested in getting involved in the community, you can join the Discord server. We have one for Vue, we have one for Vite. Both are very active, good places. So think you should be able to find them on the websites, vue.js.org and vite.js.dev.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Evan. And then back to you, Amanda.
Yes, thank you so much, Evan. This was super interesting. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you.